President Trump, the mentally unstable man with nuclear weapons who we all love making angry. Now, by his standards, the president actually had a pretty good week. And it says something about those standards that a pretty good week for this president still includes a blockbuster New York Times investigation about him possibly having committed tax fraud, a story that you completely forgot about until just now, and also this.
Yesterday, while boarding Air Force One in Minneapolis, see there,
not happening.
On his left foot, Commander-in-Chief climbing the stairs with what appears to be some toilet paper stuck to his shoe.
Now, while that is objectively funny, it's also completely unsurprising, isn't it? Because at this point, no one would be remotely shocked if he boarded Air Force One with an entire toilet stuck to his shoe. It would be totally on brand. But obviously, the big news this week was Brett Kavanaugh, who was confirmed to the Supreme Court yesterday. His confirmation was all but guaranteed the moment that Susan Collins announced that she was voting yes, a decision described disgustingly by the Wall Street Journal op-ed page as Susan Collins consents, which is their single most grossly inappropriate headline since 1963's Kennedy blows his top. And while many were concerned about how this decision would affect Christine Blasey Ford, who testified so bravely last week, the president, who had previously said that he found Ford credible, made fun of her during a rally and argued that everyone was forgetting the real victims in this process.
Well, I say that it's a very scary time for young men in America when you can be guilty of something that you may not be guilty of. This is a very difficult time.
Is it, though? Is it? Because this seems like a way less scary time for young men in America than for old men in America. Because of the two people in this picture, Timmy is currently getting a lot of useful information about what sexual assault is and how not to commit it as he prepares to navigate the rocky waters of his puberty, while Grandpa is just stuck with all these sexual assaults he's already committed. I mean, look at him clenching that baseball. He knows what he did, and there's nothing left to do now but run out the clock. Look, what became painfully clear this week was that no step in this process had a chance of altering Republicans' course. Not Blasey Ford's testimony, not the wildly inadequate FBI investigation, not a letter signed by 2,400 law professors saying they opposed his appointment, not even retired Justice Stevens arguing that after watching Kavanaugh's testimony, he no longer felt that he was fit to serve on the court. But perhaps no one embodied the Republican Party's indifference better than Orrin Hatch, who was confronted by a group of protesters on Capitol Hill and reacted like this.
Why aren't you brave enough to talk to us and exchange it with us? Don't you wave your hand at me. I wave my hand at you.
When you grow up, I'll be saying.
When I grow up, we grow up. You and I grow up. How dare you talk to women that way? How dare you that first? How dare you?
Wow. Even setting aside the spectacular condescension of telling adult women to grow up, that wave is a pretty clear fuck you. I believe that wave is what they call a Utah middle finger. But if one thing characterised this entire process, it was an utterly shameless commitment to bad faith argument, appealing to principles you either don't believe in or have no intention of upholding. Look at Mitch McConnell. He accused Democrats of being obstructionists this week, which is a little hard to take from someone who not only blocked Merrick Garland from the court, he even bragged about it.
One of my proudest moments is when I looked at Barack Obama in the eye and I said, Mr. President, you will not fill this Supreme Court vacancy.
One of your proudest moments. Mitch McConnell has 3 children. So that's got to make for an awkward Thanksgiving when you have to look at them and tell them that they're nothing that they have done can possibly compare to that one time you were a dick to the cool president. Meanwhile, Chuck Grassley railed against the falsehoods that he said Democrats had circulated against Judge Kavanaugh, but when presented with a baseless conspiracy theory about the protesters who yelled at Jeff Flake, look how quickly he co-signed on it.
Do you believe George Soros is behind all of this, paying these people to get you and your colleagues in elevators or wherever they can get in your face?
I have heard so many people believe that. I tend to believe it. I believe it fits in his attack mode that he has and how he uses his billions and billions of resources.
To talk about Trump insisting that the UN was laughing with him and not at him, which it absolutely wasn't, nor is there going to be time to delve into what was clearly the most fun story of the week, this.
Well, the Philadelphia Flyers have a new mascot, and fans are saying, what the? That's 7-foot-tall Gritty. Gritty unveiled today in front of a group of kids, probably scarred for life.
Yeah, those kids should be scarred for life, Gritty is fucking horrific. Every single photo of him is appalling. I mean, look at this one. That is a nightmare. How about this one? That is simply psychotic. Gritty looks like the end result of the orange McDonald's fry guy hooking up with Grimace. And we've been over this a million times before on this show. If you're a McDonald's mascot, you do not have sex with another McDonald's mascot. Your genetics are too similar and the kids always turn out weird. Very, very weird. And incidentally, it's not like Gritty has any business being a hockey mascot.
Apparently he hasn't really figured out how to navigate on the ice yet. He fell multiple times in his debut last night. The Pittsburgh Penguins tweeting, LOL, okay. To which Gritty responded, sleep with one eye open tonight, bird.
Holy shit, Gritty, calm down. They're just engaging in some inter-team banter and you've gone straight to I will murder you in your sleep. And look, there is absolutely nothing that I would love to do more tonight than talk about Gritty all night long. From the fact that he's already done a Kim Kardashian-style photo shoot to the fact that, and this is true, someone has already got an actual tattoo of him on their body. Interestingly, that someone, Jimmy Carter. Unfortunately, though, the fun we just had must now stop, because instead we need to talk about Brett Kavanaugh, Supreme Court nominee and walking crushed beer can. Now, on Thursday, Christine Blasey Ford, who has accused Kavanaugh of sexually assaulting her in 1982, came before the Senate Judiciary Committee to deliver some powerful testimony.
I am here today not because I want to be. I am terrified. I am here because I believe it is my civic duty to tell you what happened to me while Brett Kavanaugh and I were in high school.
Right, and she did just that, describing in detail her recollection of how a drunk Kavanaugh pinned her down, tried to remove her clothing and put his hand over her mouth when she tried to scream. She insisted that this could not possibly be a case of mistaken identity because she was 100% certain that it was him. And after her opening statement, she then took questions, which sometimes took an odd turn, like when the prosecutor, to whom the Republicans had outsourced their responsibilities, seized on a polygraph test that Ford had passed.
Did you pay for the polygraph yourself?
I don't think so.
Okay. Do you know who did pay for the polygraph?
Not yet, no.
I believe you said it hasn't been paid for yet. Is that correct?
Let me put an end to this mystery. Her lawyers have paid for her polygraph.
As is routine.
Wait! Whoa, slow your roll there. As is routine, don't you try and brush her question aside. She just cracked this case wide open. She found the missing piece of the puzzle, specifically a puzzle that reads, who fucking cares? Now, Ford's testimony was brave and compelling and seemed to affect many on the committee, including Republican Senator Orrin Hatch, who chose to express his admiration in a far from ideal way.
Have you found Dr. Ford credible?
Well, it's too early to say. I don't think she's uncredible. I think she's an attractive, good witness, but it's way early.
What do you mean by attractive, sir?
Oh, in other words, she's pleasing.
Oh, no! Pleasing? You should not use the word pleasing to describe a sexual assault survivor painfully recounting one of the worst moments of her life. You honestly shouldn't really use it to describe anything. Maybe watching milk mix into your coffee. Except, you know what? Not even then, because the moment you say, watching this milk is pleasing, you come off like a creep who's waiting for everyone to leave the room so he can fuck his coffee. The point is, by lunchtime on Thursday, it honestly seemed that Kavanaugh's nomination could be finished. Even Fox News was implying as much.
This was extremely emotional, extremely raw, and extremely credible. And nobody could listen to her deliver those words and talk about...
Concerns Saudi Arabia, birthplace of the Prophet Muhammad. The Prophet Muhammad. Our graphics department must have decided against that one for some reason. Now, Saudi Arabia has been in the news this week for a truly appalling reason, and it has to do with Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, a US resident and columnist for the Washington Post, who has not been seen since he stepped into the Saudi consulate in Turkey to pick up some paperwork 12 days ago.
This is Jamal Khashoggi captured on closed-circuit cameras, stepping into what Turkish authorities believe was a death trap. Turkish authorities have identified 15 Saudi men as persons of interest. Only hours before Khashoggi went missing, several of them were caught on camera arriving in Istanbul. A Turkish official tells the New York Times Saudi agents had dismembered his body with a bone saw they brought for the purpose.
It's absolutely horrific, and the Saudis deny it happened, although let us all agree on this. A bone saw in any context is an immediate red flag. Thanks so much for inviting me over for Thanksgiving, Craig. The turkey's delicious, the stuffing is perfect, that's a very large bone saw, and I just remembered I have to leave now. Now, Saudi officials have scrambled to explain all the suspicious activity surrounding his disappearance, with the Saudi-owned channel Al Arabiya claiming that the 15 people who turned up in Istanbul were just tourists. Which is clearly bullshit, given that flight logs showed that most of the men arrived on a private charter plane at 3:13 a.m. and that all of them departed the same day they arrived, which is a pretty weird vacation, isn't it? I want to see Istanbul, but only for a few hours, mostly at night, and I need to bring my bone saw. Also, the whole "we were just tourists" excuse isn't even a new one. In the wake of Russia's poisoning of Sergei Skripal, the Russian suspects tried the same thing.
What were you doing there?
Our friends have been suggesting for a long time that we visit this wonderful town.
Salisbury? A wonderful town?
Yes.
There's the famous Salisbury Cathedral, famous not only in Europe, but in the whole world. It's famous for its 123-meter spire. It's famous for its clock, the one of the first ever created in the world, that's still working.
OK, so first, I love how the reporter immediately became suspicious when they called Salisbury a wonderful town. She knows what's up. It's like if you heard someone call celery a delicious treat. Look, I don't know what else you're not telling the truth about, but now I definitely know you're a fucking liar. And second, it's famous for its 123-metre spire. They sound like they're reading directly off the Wikipedia page for Salisbury. Oh, why do I love Salisbury? It's simple. The population is 40,302. And their Member of Parliament is John Glenn, a Conservative whose 8-year tenure has been widely viewed as a failure, open brackets, citation needed, close brackets. But look, for all the Saudi denials, things are not looking good right now, as the Turkish government reportedly have audio and video proof of the assassination. Look, this story is incredibly grim, because while this may be the first that you have heard of Jamal Khashoggi, he has long been a significant figure in Saudi Arabia, a thoughtful and by no means radical critic of the Saudi royal family. And this is all worrying, because the only reason to kill a journalist in your own consulate with 15 people and a bone saw you flew in that day is because you wanted to send a message and you were sure you could get away with it. Which raises the question, why would they be so sure of that? And part of that answer may have to do with us. So tonight, let's take a look at America's relationship with Saudi Arabia, because we have a long and morally compromised history. In very short, for decades, we have had a relationship based on strategic interests, not shared values. They have oil, we need it. They opposed Iran, and so did we. And for those and other reasons, US presidents have, to varying degrees, been willing to pander to Saudi Arabia. And in doing so, we've conveniently turned a blind eye to a lot of things, from human rights abuses to the Saudi leadership's role in funding religious extremism, even while partnering with us to fight it. It's always been a very complicated relationship. But in the last couple of years, it's actually gotten significantly closer thanks to two new leaders, Trump and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And let's take the prince first. Though his father, the king, is still alive, since last year, the prince has effectively been running the country and has branded himself as MBS, the young, new face of Saudi Arabia. He made the cover of Time magazine under the headline Charm Offensive, and 60 Minutes profiled him as a progressive voice for the country.
His reforms inside Saudi Arabia have been revolutionary.
And it was, look, particularly grim, with yesterday's anti-Semitic attack leaving 11 dead at a Pittsburgh synagogue. This was just days after an apparently racially motivated shooting in Louisville and a series of package bombs being sent to prominent critics of Donald Trump. It has been a time for sober reflection, or, if you're Fox News discussing those package bombs, a time for wild speculation, because before the suspect was even arrested, they were giving airtime to a truly ludicrous theory.
You talked in your notes earlier about the potential that it could be a false flag.
We cannot rule out that it's a false flag operation.
I feel
these are false flag bombings.
At the risk of sounding like a far right-wing lunatic, I have to say that I believe that this whole thing was an elaborate hoax.
Yeah, but here's the thing about that. Sounding like a far right-wing lunatic is not really a risk for the Fox News brand, is it? It's more of a guarantee. It'd be like if Tony Bennett started every song with, "At the risk of making your grandma wet." What are you talking about, Tony? We all know that's going to happen. It's specifically what you're here to do. Now, once the suspect was found, and it was clear not just that the bombs were real, but that he was very much a Trump supporter, Geraldo apologised, tweeting, "Never mind, outsmarted myself in conjuring false flag operation." Now, can I just say that outsmarted myself is a brilliant way to say that you did something incredibly stupid. Wow, I really outsmarted myself this morning when I accidentally ate kitty litter instead of grape nuts. I remember thinking as I chewed the clumps, I truly am 2 steps ahead of me. But incredibly, even after the suspect's motivations were clear, some Trump supporters remained insistent that there was more to this story.
Obama probably sent his to himself, and Hillary Clinton probably sent hers to herself.
So you don't think this guy actually sent these bombs to these officials?
No, probably not.
Why?
They probably had it done. They may have paid him to do it.
What would be the upside of that?
Trying to bring people feeling over to their side.
And against Trump?
Yeah.
OK, I got it. So Obama flew to Florida, mailed a bomb to himself in Washington, then flew back just in time to avoid it, all to frame this guy. Now, I'm not saying that that man's theory doesn't have any holes in it, but at least we can all agree he really outsmarted Geraldo Rivera. But for now, let's move on to Saudi Arabia, the country with bans on pork, alcohol and porn, or as it's known in America, a Florida breakfast. Now, Saudi Arabia is continuing to deal with the ongoing fallout from the death of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who disappeared after entering the Saudi Arabian consulate in Istanbul, which reportedly also contained 15 Saudi operatives who'd flown in with an autopsy specialist and a bone saw. The Saudis initially insisted that Khashoggi had left the embassy alive, but now admit that they'd incorrectly remembered what happened, or dismembered, if you will. Their story instead became that he'd been killed, but for good reason.
They say discussions led to a brawl, and he died in a fist fight.
Yeah, a fist fight. Apparently it started when they had a disagreement over whether or not Khashoggi should be murdered in cold blood. You see, he didn't think so, but the Saudis were really adamant it was a good idea, and, you know, one thing just led to another. Now, of course, this story was, as Khashoggi's editor at the Washington Post tweeted, utter bullshit, which should also definitely be the new term that the Post uses when fact-checking politicians. It's certainly better than using their current system of 1 to 4 Pinocchios. Come on, you're a journalistic institution. Why are you using a dishonest wood demon from a children's story? Now, the Saudis then abandoned that story and suggested that the killing may have been premeditated, which was obvious from the start, especially as it now appears the killers had the laziest of strategies to convince people that Khashoggi had left the consulate safely.
CNN aired what appears to be surveillance video, described to them by a Turkish source as one of the key suspects dressed in Khashoggi's clothes, even apparently a fake beard.
Oh, come on, that is pathetic. For a start, Khashoggi is bald and the body double has a full head of hair. If you're picking a body double for someone, you better make sure they look exactly like that person. That is why my body double is this owl. The resemblance is uncanny. You can't even tell which one is the real owl. OK. Anyone who calls a baby's name and then gives up on finding them either knows nothing about babies or is covering for a baby who doesn't actually want to be reached. Sorry, just tell them I'm not in today. I'm up to my diaper and triangles over here, and I've got a 2:30 meeting with my own toes to prep for Mondays, am I right? Seriously, am I right? I don't know the days of the week. I am, after all, a fucking baby. And even with the help of non-profits in locating and reuniting parents, hundreds of whom, incidentally, were actually deported without their children, the government still had fuck-ups. Like when one mother who'd had her 5-month-old breastfeeding baby taken away was later handed back the wrong baby. And just imagine thinking you're about to be reunited with your child after being forced apart and being given someone else's shitty baby. I say this as a parent. My infant is a miracle and a joy. Anyone else's is a charmless snot monster. Get it away from me. So, to put it mildly, when it comes to how did we do this, the answer seems to be a combination of incompetently and cruelly, which brings us to the other big question, why? Why did we do this? Well, some in the Trump administration argue that they simply had no choice.
Are you intending for this to play out as it is playing out? Are you intending for parents to be separated from their children? Are you intending to send a message?
I find that offensive. No, because why would I ever create a policy that purposely does that?
Perhaps it's a deterrent.
No.
No! A deterrent? I would never. You offend me, sir. Here's the thing about this administration. You can always tell you've figured out exactly what they're doing when they get offended by your description of what they might be doing. It's a pretty obvious tell. It's like a poker player ejaculating every time they have a good hand. Okay, I think we all see what's happening here. Now, often the official line was that family separations were not a deterrent, they were simply a consequence of having to enforce the law, as the then acting head of ICE, Thomas Homan, explained at the time.
Every law enforcement agency in this country separates parents from children when they're arrested for a crime. We are a law enforcement agency. We are enforcing the criminal laws. I don't blame anybody if you want to be the greatest country on earth, being a part of this greatest country on earth, which we all are. But there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it.
Okay, it's pretty hard to listen to someone say we're the greatest country on earth while simultaneously justifying why we're unnecessarily ripping kids away from their parents, especially when that person looks like what would happen if a can of Monster Energy drink fucked John Lithgow. But look, a few things there regarding the right way, because first, many of these people were applying for asylum, meaning they're seeking protection from persecution. And under international and US law, it is legal to apply for that no matter how you enter the country. Second, while the Trump administration insisted that the right way for asylum seekers to come in was through a port of entry like an official border crossing, they made it far more difficult to do that, with many being repeatedly denied entry into the country and forced to wait days or even weeks. And you can't just arbitrarily delay people that long. They're asylum seekers looking for safety, not AT&T customers trying to speak to a representative. That's right, I've got your business, Daddy. I've got you so good. What are you going to do about it? I'm right here. Now, finally, crossing the border in the wrong way is actually only a misdemeanor on first offence. In fact, most people are usually just sentenced to time served. And that's the thing here. Contrary to what you might think, most of the parents who were separated from their kids were charged, pled guilty and served their sentence all fairly quickly. Now, in the past, we generally didn't prosecute parents and even let many of them go free awaiting their immigration hearing, which makes sense. So, why did we suddenly start keeping people who had already served their time locked up and away from their kids? Well, because Trump hated the old system. He called it catch and release, and he described it in wildly misleading terms.
We catch a criminal, a real criminal, a rough, tough criminal. We take his name and then we release him. Right. And we say, please show up to court in a couple of months. You know what the chances of getting him to court are? Like 0, okay?
Right. Now, deep down, when Trump said the number 0, you just instinctively knew that no matter what the number was, it was definitely not 0, right? Because if he says something's hot, it's cold. If he says something's up, it's down. If he said, this is a cute puppy, you'd automatically think, I'm not sure why or how, but that puppy is definitely a fucking arsehole. Yes, the Deepwater Horizon famously pumped over 130 million gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico, about 12 times the size of the Exxon Valdez spill, costing the region billions and badly hurting the fishing and tourism industries. And you know it was a disaster because Mark Wahlberg made a movie about it. And he usually chooses to star in films about the most absolutely appalling things. Stuff like tragic shipwrecks, acts of terrorism, and Mel Gibson's seamless reintegration into Hollywood. And years after Deepwater Horizon, the region was still feeling the effects.
When the little boats fish in this area right here, half of what they catch is deformed.
Really? Half?
Half, yeah.
And what kind of deformities?
They got tumors on the head, little bumps off the side. It's all in the gills where they breathe at. Shit all in there.
Yeah. So that's oil in its gills.
Yeah. If you take this shell off, you could pull the oil out, you could smell it.
Yeah, that's horrible. Not only did that spill devastate an economy, it somehow actually managed to make shrimp even more disgusting. And I hate shrimp. They are slimy, armoured alien bugs for whom proper preparation involves pulling out their shit vein. There is not enough cocktail sauce in the world to erase the memory of a shit vein, and yet somehow that oil spill made them even grosser. Now, before Deepwater Horizon, the Minerals Management Service was in charge of both safety on oil rigs and collecting revenues from oil companies, which was clearly a bad idea because it was an obvious conflict of interest. So, after Deepwater, they created Bessie, an agency whose only job is to keep people and the environment safe. That is their sole responsibility. Promotion of drilling in the Gulf, that is someone else's job. Bessie's is safety. That is all they do. That is probably why its last two heads were a former Coast Guard officer specialising in marine safety and a former Coast Guard officer specialising in marine safety. However, Trump has taken a different path, appointing Scott Angel, former Lieutenant Governor of Louisiana, and a guy who is aggressively pro-drilling. For a sense of just how aggressive he is, just days after the Deepwater well was capped, Angel was at a rally organised by the Louisiana Oil and Gas Association where he called for an immediate resumption of deep-sea drilling, saying this:
Enough is enough, and it's time to quit punishing innocent American workers to achieve some unrealistic political agenda. While we too support the use of renewable and alternative energy, let's keep the conversation real. America is not yet ready to get all of its fuel from the birds and the bees and the flowers and the trees.
Hold on. America is not yet ready to get fuel from trees? You mean wood? Scientists have understood how wood works for years now, maybe even decades. But after serving as Lieutenant Governor, Angel joined the board of Sunoco Logistics Partners, an oil pipeline company earning nearly $1 million, and now he's regulating the oil industry. And if there is any doubt about his priorities, which there is not, just wait until you see something we found on YouTube. Because last year, Angel gave a presentation at an oil industry conference where he was flanked by two men, one in a hard hat, both of whom were eating during a significant portion of his speech. But that is not the important part. The incredible moment is when he makes it painfully clear exactly how accessible he, the man in charge of enforcing safety, remember, is willing to be to industry leaders.
My cell number is, if anybody wants to give me a call to talk about it, my cell number is 571-585-3730. 571-585-3730. I'd rather you call me. Everything you text to me is a public record, so be careful. This is a business opportunity for you to engage with me on what you believe we ought to be about.
Holy shit! He just gave out his work cell phone number and encouraged oil bosses to call him on it as a business opportunity. That is outrageous for two reasons. First, because he's doing that to avoid the public record. And second, no one should ever call rather than text. I don't care what the scenario is. If you prefer calling to texting, you're a fucking psychopath and you should be put in prison forever. You text, whatever the situation.